Hello and welcome to REDTalks 2021. I'm Catherine. I am the REDTalks coordinator and I am a 2016 grad.
Hi, my name is Kathleen Wen and I am a 2020 grad and I am the speaker coordinator. I just want to say a huge shout out to our speakers. Thank you so much for sticking with us, and I know it's been a hard transition, but I'm so glad you got to share your stories tonight.
Hello everybody, Connor 30, class 2019. I'm the sponsorship coordinator for the REDTalks team. Thank you so much to all of our sponsors. Appreciate everything you've done, and off to RJ.
Good evening, good morning, or whenever you are watching this, and welcome to the 2021 virtual REDTalks event. My name is RJ Alpers, and I'm absolutely honored to be your host this year. Now, I remember when the REDTalks team first came to me and talked about hosting this first ever REDTalks virtually. I was reminded of a quote by the great business leader and rapper Michael Scott, in which he said, "I knew exactly what to do, but in a much more real sense, I had no idea what to do." And that's a little bit how I feel here. While we are so unbelievably thankful and grateful for all the hard work that this REDTalks team has done to put together this virtual event, I'll be the first to say it's really weird talking to no one. And along those lines, with not knowing how to talk to anybody, I wasn't entirely sure what to talk about with you guys this year, because it has been 2 years since we hosted the last REDTalks, and a few things have gone on since then. So there was a lot to cover. I didn't know what to do, so I figured I'd stick with my old guns. I'd make fun of myself and talk about the hot dumpster fire that has been 2020, and by all accounts appears to be continuing into 2021. So a little bit about myself. My name is RJ Alpers. I'm a class of 2017 grad from CSB-SJU. I was a political science and Hispanic studies double major. But some of you might know me from some of my more famous works, such as I am the reason why the BAC doors lock at night. I also started a very edgy sketch comedy group here that talked about the social commentary and environment of both campuses, that drew attacks from extremists on the internet and had to be shut down by school administration. And the last thing you might know me from is for being Bob's son. My dad is Bob Alpers, and I just want to get that out of the way so we can move on with the rest of the evening. My dad, Bob Alpers, is the athletic director here at St. John's. And he has been an employee at St. John's since the dawn of time. Or I think about the Truman administration, one of the two, but it has been a while. But a little known fact is actually so much of my family and the foundation and everything that I know and love is because of the CSB and SJU community. That's one of the reasons why I'm so honored to be your host here. So my mom, she was actually a Benny too, and for a brief time was a business professor here as well. And it's actually a really cute and fun story. So my dad's Johnny, my mom's a Benny, and they met over in St. Joe at that cute little study spot. What's it called? The Law. Yeah. So they met there. But I have an uncle who's a Johnny. I have an aunt who's a Benny. My girlfriend was a Benny. And truly, all of the great things in my life and that I'm thankful for are because and thanks to the CSB-SJU community. So I guess, long story short, what I'm trying to say is that nepotism is pretty sweet, and that's really the only reason why I'm here hosting, because I have no talent. But no, on a more serious note, like some of the previous hosts that we've had for this event, I think one of the reasons why I was asked to host REDTalks is because I used to be silly. And the reason why I say I used to be silly is because I was very lucky when I was at St. John's. I was in the CSB-SJU improv group, Attention Starved Children, all 4 years. I started a sketch comedy group here with a bunch of my best friends, and I got to do stand-up comedy here all over the place in a lot of cool locations and with some really talented people. But since my time ended at CSB-SJU, I have tried to mature. I at least feel older. I'm reminded of that every day because I recently had back surgery, which is wonderful. I now have gray hair on my head, which I believe coincided with law school. And I'm now actually an attorney for the state of Minnesota in their judicial branch. So long story short, I think that's the ultimate reason why I say I used to be silly, is because while I think some of the key life skills that you learn in comedy, specifically improv, like going with the flow and yes and not negating, are great life skills, I found they do not particularly go over well in the courtroom. As a matter of fact, turns out judges absolutely hate it when you make up everything on the spot. And the tenet of yes and often leads to perjuring your own witnesses and never negating them. So truly it is problematic, and that's why I say I haven't felt silly in quite a while. With all of that being said, a part of me does feel very at home here today, because in case you might not have noticed, I am actually here in the Stephen B. Humphrey Auditorium, and we thought that would be a great way to give a CSB SJU feel to this virtual event. And the reason why I say I feel at home is I'm here on this stage, and as I previously mentioned, no one is in the audience, but to be completely honest with you, nobody being in the audience is pretty typical for a Saturday night improv comedy show on a college campus. So if we could just pan around and show no one being here, just kidding, that's my girlfriend Kylie, hi. She drove me here, so she has to stay till I'm done. But with that being said, a COVID crowd turns out not all that different from an improv crowd. So I do feel right at home in that regard. And I want to just address one more thing before we start our show. As nobody's here, as the event was canceled last year, and as we've gone to a virtual format this year, I think it's fair to address how incredibly difficult and challenging 2020 was. We've had the COVID-19 pandemic. We've had huge social, civil rights changes, movements. It's been an incredibly stressful time. And on top of that, one of the most difficult things has been how much time we've spent apart, whether it's isolating or quarantining. It's been a really tough year. And truthfully, I think that's all the more reason why it's so important that we're having this year's Red Talks. It's a chance for us to come together. Now, admittedly, not in person, but for this show, we can come together and form that sense of community that I think made a lot of us want to come to St. Ben's and St. John's in the first place. It's that sense of community that we felt every day here on campus. And it's that sense of community we feel every time we come back as alums. And it's just an incredibly special place. And tonight is a chance for us to do that and to celebrate our young alums, the people in our community and globally who are making changes that we get to highlight, celebrate. It's a night of optimism and a night of hope. And we just have a tremendous lineup of speakers coming to you tonight that we're so excited to present. They are absolutely brilliant. So I think you've heard enough from me. Let's get this show on the roll or on Zoom. And one of the things I need to address lastly is because everyone is presenting on Zoom, we have made them sign a contract. They are fully clothed. They are wearing pants. So stick around. We've got a great show coming up. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Red Talks. Since continuity is a bit overrated, I figured I'd bring the rest of the show to you from my home. And my home, which is, I guess, for so many of us this year, been my office, my home, my kitchen, my gym, my place of worship, just about anything during this trying year. So I'm glad I get to do a little bit of that hosting and show a little bit of hospitality from me to you. Our first speakers of the evening are from Trink, L.L.C, alumni Bardia, Bijani, Aval, and Joe Caughey. And they like to call themselves the odd couple. So together, these 2020 alums are the co-founders of Trink, L.L.C, a company focused on making portable and user-specific tools. They've been business owners for more than 2 years now, having released 4 products and sold more than 12,000
multi-units during this time, most of them as full-time college students. While in school, they were often referred to as the odd couple by friends and faculty alike, in large part because they are close to polar opposites. They've always made it work, though. Take, for example, junior year when Bardia was feeling especially homesick. One thing the odd couple does have in common is their ties to Sweden. So Bardia through nationality and Joe through heritage. So Joe found a good fix and a way to put some Sweden back into the Swede. They road trip to IKEA for some meatballs. Bardia and Joe are proof that different is good. It's a sentiment they would like to share to you all in their own odd way.
Hi, I'm Bardia Bijani.
And I'm Joe Caughey.
We are 2020 alumni, Zoom graduates, if you will, and the co-founders of Trink, a multi-tool company that makes portable and innovative products that target non-traditional multi-tool users. Since sophomore year of 2018, Trink has grown to become one of the most successful companies in the history of the McNeely Center's Entrepreneur Scholars Program. However, the story of how that came to be was, frankly, never supposed to happen. Why? Well, let's back up a bit. Joe and I started our college journeys in 2016 and wound up on the same freshman floor. Mary 3 for those who are wondering. And coming from Sweden, I had a truly difficult time adjusting to life in rural Minnesota and was really stressed throughout that time. And then there was Joe, the floor mate who just loved disturbing the balance. I despised every interaction I had with Joe my freshman year, and I had every right to. Don't take it from me. Joe, care to explain?
Yeah, I remember freshman year moving into Mary Hall like it was just yesterday. And I kept running this one kid down the hall whose name I never bothered to learn because frankly, I really couldn't even pronounce it. So I just called him Sweden. And I would walk past from time to time and say, "Hey, Sweden, how's it going?" I knew nothing about Sweden other than the fact that he played online soccer on a semi-pro level. I remember clearly one evening I got his phone number from a friend and I prank called him. I had told him that his FIFA online gaming account was being shut down due to suspicious activity. To say the least, that was the end of any relationship we had at that point. Well, all jokes came back to bite me when I met my entrepreneurship class for the first time. Who was standing there other than Sweden himself? We didn't speak at all that first semester, other than just in passing. So it came as a big surprise to me when one day, after I started work on the concept of Trink, Bardia came into class and he announced that he intended to join me on my venture. At that point, I knew I was in trouble because I had to pronounce his full name, which is Bardia Bijani Aval.
He may know how to pronounce it now, but he still spells it wrong occasionally. But at this point, remembering my name was the least of our problems. We didn't have a company. We didn't have a finalized product. Hell, we didn't even have a name for a potential company. And we initially disagreed a lot on mission and vision and had a lot of work to do, work that many feared would be impossible to get through because of how different Joe and I are. And at times, it certainly felt that way. I'm an introvert, he's an extrovert. I majored in math and computer science, he was all out business. My grades were important to me, Joe didn't even want to attend college. The only thing that could be considered a remote similarity between us is the fact that we both have ties to Sweden. I through citizenship, Joe through heritage. And with that comes a strong shared passion for IKEA. But what may often be seen as an obstacle was actually our blessing in disguise.
Bardia and I are proof that different is good. Our personal differences also mean that our collective skill set is very broad. And this helps us jump through many of the obstacles that come our way with being a small business. And being a small business owner, you truly have to be able to wear every hat of a larger, more established organization with more personnel. For instance, you'd think that the science and analytics guy that Bardia is would handle engineering for Trink, and that was the plan. But when do these things go according to the plan? Throughout our time working on Trink, I, with the business background, have more often than not found my strengths in engineering, design, and sales, and Bardia with the science background has led on branding, marketing, and accounting. It's funny just how these things turn out, and boy, have they turned out well. Together, us, the odd couple, our nickname among friends and faculty alike, established an L.L.C, opened up business bank accounts, designed more than 200 prototypes, fully bootstrapped a company through crowdfunding, and now we've launched more than 5 products, sold more than 12,000 multi-tools, been named the Venture of the Year by our schools, competed in the semifinal of statewide business competition, Minnesota Cup, and much more. We've even traveled the world together to find suitable manufacturers. But as much success as we've had, none of it has come for free.
Yeah, it's easy to get the idea that this was a success story, completely void of obstacles to overcome. But if other individuals have made sacrifices for Trink, which they have, we've made the ultimate ones. We have put our entire beings into this business. As full-time college students, we would put in 30-hour weeks, staying up in the student venture hatchery until 1 to 2 a.m. on a regular basis to deal with, excuse me, all the crap that comes with establishing a business. And then, as if all that stuff wasn't enough, a pandemic hit just as we were about to graduate from college. In March, Joe drove me to MSP as I left the US through deserted airports, thinking about how to keep Trink thriving in times when most small businesses were in trouble. Instead, we pulled 3 straight all-nighters to quickly release a tool that would help people avoid high-contact surfaces throughout the pandemic, one of many other pivots during these 2.5 years. We've also had to make some personal sacrifices. I remember vividly how Joe and I were on our way to meet with a manufacturing partner in Center City, Minnesota, when I had to say goodbye to my grandmother over the phone in his car. Just a week later, we were in a meeting together with our mentor, Ed Driscoll, when I found out that she had passed away. Needless to say, Joe and I have, essentially like an odd couple, seen highs and lows together. But our personal mantras have gotten us through it. Joe often talks about persistence to a vision, and I like to say that you gotta love the process. And well, we've had some help too.
Despite all the challenges, Trink has brought so many cool, life-shaping memories and wonderful people into our lives. Adam Kuchevsky in instructional technology helped us 3D print our first prototype and got us started on the route of 3D printing and design. Johnny alum Bob Foster set up our L.L.C and has handled our legal stuff. Kevin Clancy at the Center for Global Education introduced us to our manufacturer. And throughout this time, the wonderful people at the McNeely Center, primarily Paul Marsnick, Margaret Newhouse, Steve Schwartz, and Kelly Gerdine, have done so much to get us to where we are right now. And as if that weren't enough, Bardia and I have learned and received help from hundreds and hundreds of Johnnies and Bennies all around the world to make this happen. In conclusion, at the end of the day, we all share something in common, whether you realize it or not. You, just like us, have an idea that picks the back of your brain. That idea that we could be doing something other than what our current reality is. Whether that's where we live, who we work for, hopefully not who we're married to, it's only natural. But that at its core is why we all are naturally drawn to the idea of entrepreneurship. This glimmer of hope where you could create your own reality. Tonight, maybe you realize this to be true for you and that you want to try something new, a new challenge, and maybe that is to work for yourself and make your own rules in life. And if you take nothing else away from this, other than I was a bullied Bardia, take this. Every day that you wait to pursue that little dream in the back of your brain, the harder it will be for you to go for it. As every day that passes, the more responsibilities you will have holding you back. There will always be an excuse for why you can't, but you'll never get this time back.
There are so many more things we'd like to share with you, but time is running short, and so we want to leave you with this. If you have an ambition and you have the privilege to pursue it, do it now. Societies and systems may treat us all differently, but in the eyes of Father Time, we're all equal. Don't settle for less, get to work, and if there's anything Joe and I can do to help you out, please don't hesitate to reach out. If there's anything we learned during our time in college, it's that entrepreneurship, if done right, is the art of giving back. We want to be part of your success in the same way that other Johnnies and Bennies were integral to ours. Trink may have been the first venture Joe and I have worked together on, but it sure as hell won't be the last. Thank you for coming to our Red Talk.
And a huge thanks to Trink L.L.C. for starting off the show so strongly. Our next speaker is Kia Lohr for her speech and her talk, The Trailblazer. Kia is a St. Ben's grad, class of 2013. Kia is an agent of radical institutional healing, and she does this through intercultural education. Kia is currently the Associate Director of the Greenfield Intercultural Center at the University of Pennsylvania. As a first-generation low-income college student born in a refugee camp in Thailand and raised in St. Paul, Minnesota, Kia has dedicated her career to paving the way for youth who straddle the intersections of interculturalism, multilingualism, racism, poverty, sexism, and intergenerational trauma. Kia is interested in continuing to develop the international, multicultural, and diverse state of higher education. Her research includes sociolinguistics, intercultural communication, international education, Hmong American diaspora, Hmong women narratives, and digital storytelling. Kia attained her bachelor's degree in communications at St. Ben's and then went on to earn her master's in intercultural communication at the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education. Kia is just so tremendously impressive. She's been honored as an Anne Bancroft Dare to Dream mini grant winner, an Intercultural Lead Fellower, a Gates Millennium Scholar, an Optimist Club Scholar, recipient of the Society for Intercultural Education, Training and Research for the acronym SIETAR USA Award. She's been a LEAP Advanced Fellow and a recipient of the Emerging Scholar Award for 2020 from the International Conference on Diversity in Organizations, Communities, and Nations. Kia was recently published in Staring Down the Tiger, Stories of Hmong American Women. In this Red Talk, she will be reading her published narrative titled The Trailblazer.
Mochi Jandu, The Trailblazer. Since childhood, I was known as the Mochi Jandu, the leader of the sheep herd, because I was born in the year of the sheep in the sign of Aries. More than that, I was naturally a curious child who wandered around the city with my purple bike, leading my younger sisters and little cousins in what we called journeys. Back in the day, they would call this act Bo Lai, a radical female rebel, when it was really just trailblazing. I knew at a very young age that I was born a trailblazer, even though I didn't have the language for it then. I knew this because I deeply enjoyed exploring unknown territories and formulating new trails. However, growing up on government welfare in a single-parent household as a public school-educated Hmong girl who would become the first person in her family to attend college made trailblazing an uphill challenge. No one in my family had ventured beyond the unknown territories of the Hmong circle, so consequently, the ethnocentric values of the Hmong people ran deep in my community. And being female made it even harder to be a trailblazer because of the rigid cultural expectations. Gender roles were explicit for men and women. Men were socialized to be the bosses, while women were socialized to be bossed, particularly to be a nya, a daughter-in-law. This rhetoric made me sick to my stomach. For all I know, I didn't qualify as a good nya because of my mother's divorce reputation. People judged me based on her. Like mother, like daughter, they would say. Therefore, I didn't even stand a chance to be judged on my own merit to be a nya. Not that I wanted to be a nya anyway. I had an unconventional mother who was always running in and out of marriages, battling her own addiction, and struggling with her own cultural limitations. At 12 years old, I suspected something was fundamentally wrong with the fact that my mother was forced to marry and divorce her 4 abusive husbands because she couldn't opt out from the Hmong marriage game, a game in which she would remain the loser every single time. I am the second child of 6, and more importantly, I am the first and eldest daughter. That meant that I had the most responsibilities. And because of this, I found myself double cast as a child and a parent. At times, I played the child who needed permission from my mother to do sleepovers, to add hot Cheetos to the shopping cart, and to set up my dentist appointments. Other times, I played the parent who executed the payment of bills, translated at teacher-parent conferences for my siblings and myself, and forged signatures on field trip permission slips. I didn't know this then, but in retrospect, this balancing act prepared me to be a cultural broker in the broader American political, cultural, and educational domains. Little did I know that my difficult and convoluted years of first-hand experience growing up on government welfare in a single-parent household as a public school educated first-generation Hmong female college student would grant me first-class access to a wealth of empathy, tenacity, and bravery. I remember how my mother used to compare herself with the knife and me with the pencil. She said, "Kia, I can control the knife gracefully. I would never die from starvation because of my mastery in cooking." I, on the other hand, was very skilled with a pencil, something she was not. She said to me that my ability to control the pencil would grant our story eternal life. Therefore, reading, writing, and literacy became my tools of emancipation. To me, education had always been an escape route away from other cultural and financial struggles and problems at home. And quite frankly, I excelled in the classroom. At school, I was judged on my own merit, on my own ability to produce knowledge, to reiterate concepts and theories, and to intentionally reflect on my own experiences. In the classroom, I was praised for my eloquence, my intellectual contributions, and my critical contributions and opinions. On top of that, I was encouraged to be a leader on campus, to participate in organizations such as the National Honor Society, Link Crew, badminton, and various other clubs and organizations. I was encouraged to be a trailblazer. If trailblazing was my fire, education kindled it. And through my achievements in education, I began rejecting the Hmong patriarchal values because I found them oppressive and unfair, especially for women like my mother. College wasn't in my schema until junior year of high school, which was pretty late. I owe a great deal of my educational success to mentors and guidance counselors and organizations such as the Hmong Women's Circle, the Youth Leadership Initiative, Hmong Teen, the First Step Program, and many others who believed in me and gave me instruments to access higher education. I scored a one-way ticket the moment I received the Gates Millennium Scholarship, a scholarship that would pay for 6 years of my higher education. For me, it was the golden ticket to any college and university in the United States. I remember thinking to myself that going to college was going to be my intervention to end the cycle of oppression in my family. Or so I thought. Little did I know that I was exiting one system of oppression only to enter into another. I faced tremendous contradictions in my educational career. At the institutional level, I found it disheartening that educational access and success remained a serious problem for traditionally underrepresented populations, most notably for students from low-income, first-generation, non-English speaking, and specific racial and ethnic groups. And then at the personal level, I found myself conflicted to reconcile my Hmong and American identities. People always ask me, "Where are you from, Kia?" No, where are you really from? I remember continuously fighting for my right to be treated fairly as an American student from the United States, not from abroad, and that I spoke English fluently. and that I was just as deserving and as smart as any of the other college students, especially the white students. Being a Hmong person in a predominantly white institution, such as the College of St. Benedict in central Minnesota, my experience of college was drastically different from my white peers. For example, most Hmong students didn't study abroad because one, they don't know about it, or two, they can't afford it. I was only able to study abroad because I had a full ride scholarship. In fact, the concept of studying abroad was so bizarre that when I introduced my mother to the fact that I would spend 5 months each in India and China, she was shocked as to why I would want to study in a developing country. The United States has the best education in the world, Kia, and most students in the world would die to be in your shoes, she exclaimed. She reminded me of how she survived the Vietnam War just to bring me to the United States so that I would receive the best education in the world. She wanted me to be educated as an American. I told her that studying abroad was what educated Americans do. While abroad, I observed the ubiquitous tensions in racial and ethnic relations between white American students and American students of color. I was the only Asian girl in both of my study abroad programs. I was astonished to see how white privilege manifested during my semesters abroad, and was taken aback as to how unfairly I was treated compared to my white colleagues. For example, most of the time, I was mistaken as the tour guide in our group. Frustrated with the discrimination, I returned to campus and tearfully expressed my concerns to many professors and study abroad directors. Though they offered sympathy, they were ill-prepared to give me the comfort and validation that I needed. And from that point on, I concluded that higher education institutions needed to reconsider prior beliefs about the strategies that they use to educate a different population of students, especially minority students like me. Now, there is no doubt that my scholarships and my desire for education has put me on a trajectory beyond my childhood circumstances. It has indeed afforded me the social and financial mobility to explore uncharted territories that my family would never be able to provide me. Territories such as 2 study abroad experiences, both in India and in China, and to be able to navigate privileged spaces such as the College of St. Benedict, the University of Pennsylvania, and Wesleyan University. I am tremendously grateful. However, it would be dishonest of me to not address the social reproductive system of education, a system that trains the wealthy to take up places at the top of the economy and conditions the poor to accept lowly status in class structure. It would be disingenuous of me to not recognize the problematic neoliberal discourse used by higher education institutions to recruit low-income, high-achieving students like me. Higher education has provided a safe and comfortable and secure space away from poverty. But has it really taken me out of poverty? Can I really use the master's tool to dismantle the master's house? That much I'm still trying to figure out. What I know for sure is this. Education has given me the critical thinking skills to differentiate what is truth and what is perspective. Education has acted as a microphone to amplify my voice. Education has transformed my understanding of social justice and social movements. I believe it is education's responsibility to be a space of reflection, transformation, and liberation. And I'm so grateful that I get to do that every day in my work as the Associate Director of the Greenfield Intercultural Center at the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope that as you heard my story, you see yourself reflected in it. And if not, I hope that it gives you a window into seeing into a life and a world that is different than your own. Thank you so much.
Welcome back, and thanks so much to Kia for that wonderful talk. Our next speaker is appropriately named Mary Uran, and her talk is titled Ready to Run. Mary is the executive director and co-founder of Girls on the Run Twin Cities, GOTRTC. a nonprofit that empowers girls to know and activate their limitless potential and boldly pursue their dreams. Mary co-founded the Twin Cities chapter of Girls on the Run International and has grown it from two school site locations to more than 200 locations in 2020. GOTRTC is an innovative after-school program that sits at the crossroads of youth development and sport. In a world of competitive youth sports, it focuses on building a mastery climate and life skills at the same time, such as gratitude, community service, self-worth, and using your voice. Mary holds a Master of Arts degree in Public Health Nutrition from the University of Minnesota School of Public Health. In 2016, St. Ben's honored her with the Decade Award. Prior to serving as director for GOTRTC, Mary worked for the Network for Public Health Law in St. Paul and the National Association of Attorneys General in Washington, D.C. She lives in St. Paul with her husband and 3 children, was a founding board member of Minnesota Public Radio's Generation Listen, and is a current board member of the National CMV Foundation and the Brave Like Gabe Foundation. We're so excited to have Mary speak.
Da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-da. Woo, I need some water, a massage, maybe some more of that chafing gel. It was a blustery December Saturday morning, and I was sprinting down the National Mall and climbing the steps of the Lincoln Memorial Rocky style to finish a 9-mile run. It was my longest run ever, and the short marble steps seemed to last forever. I was training alongside a group of 20 newfound friends and our coach Kevin, who is our running coach, our cheerleader, and our taskmaster. Okay, team, we have our 10-mile run next week, and then that's it. We taper. My hand shot up. Wait. I thought a half marathon is 13.1 miles. Why is our longest training run only 10? Coach Kevin shared that total weekly mileage is a better predictor of how you'll do in the race, not the longest run. Consistency and building a strong foundation is key. Trust yourself, trust the process, plus the crowd will carry you home, Coach Kevin said. Coach Kevin was telling me I was gonna have to do something before I felt ready. This went against every bone in my body. I had taste tested every running goo in the store, invested more than a month's rent on new running gear. I was paying Coach Kevin to train me, and I wasn't gonna dress rehearse this. I was training for my very first race, a half marathon, and though I had never considered myself an athlete, I was newly diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, and I knew I just needed to do something to process this chronic diagnosis. So moving my body while raising money for a cure made sense. Fast forward to January, about a month later, and the start of the Miami Half Marathon. I was nervous. A change of scenery was exciting, but I missed the safe and the known route of the mall, the drumbeat of my feet on the cinder path. It was pitch dark and colder than it should have been in Miami, but the crowd and energy was electric. Music was pumping, the announcer and a cherry picker above our heads wishing us well as thousands of us set off. I calmed my nerves and centered myself with Coach Kevin's mantra: trust yourself, trust the process, the crowd will carry you home. In the years that have followed that race, I've held on to Coach Kevin's words, and they've really become a touchstone for me. Even though I didn't feel prepared on race day, I was. I didn't believe I could make it to the end of the race, but Coach Kevin believed in me, and he pushed me through my own disbelief. Thanks to my hard work and Coach Kevin's words, I finished the race. And the lesson that sometimes we have to jump in and do things before we feel ready has stuck with me. But that's hard, isn't it? Especially if you can't see yourself in someone who has gone before you, especially if you're a woman or a member of another marginalized community, because girls and women are taught that they can't afford to fail, and that in order to be successful, they need to have every I dotted and T crossed, every goo consumed. But we need girls and women to do things before they're ready. It's a detriment to all of us when girls and women hold themselves back. Research found that 1/3 of 7 to 10-year-old girls felt the need to be perfect. Hewlett-Packard found women applied for a promotion only when they met 100% of the qualifications. Men applied when they met just 50%. Perfectionist pressure, seeing anything other than perfection as failure, results in girls playing it safe. It crushes risk-taking and creativity. The loss of self-belief that comes from falling short of unrealistic expectations can push girls into a vicious cycle where the anxiety around perfection hinders their willingness to try, to take risks, make decisions, and then performance suffers and stress increases. And for girls and women of color especially, perfectionism isn't a choice, it's a requirement. And bravery, quite frankly, is a privilege. We need our girls to see women go before them, jumping before they feel 100% prepared. And we need men and boys to cheer girls and women on from the sidelines, encouraging them to take risks. Just imagine a world with more Malalas, Stacey Abrams, Dolly Partons, Serena Williams. When girls and women do better, we all do better. 5 years after running the Miami half, I had to call on Coach K's words in a major way. I found myself sitting on a bench outside the St. Paul Student Commons of the University of Minnesota, heavy backpack on, phone to my ear. I'd moved back to Minnesota from DC to get my master's in public health. And right when I got to Minneapolis, I set to work establishing roots. Volunteerism has always been a strong value of mine, and it's also been a great way to meet new friends. So I set about signing up for a volunteer opportunity I had loved doing in DC, being a coach for Girls on the Run. I knew for me, coaching a group of 3rd through 5th grade girls twice a week after school to both run a 5K and build social and emotional life skills would be hard to fit into my schedule between grad school and work, but it would be a huge energy boost. Plus, every time I coached, I walked away with a lesson I needed to hear: setting boundaries, self-worth, using your voice. I was on the phone with Lisa, head of council development at Girls on the Run International. Hi, yes, I'm trying to find a site to coach at this fall in Minneapolis, but Google is telling me that Girls on the Run is not in the Twin Cities. How is that even possible? Lisa laughed. We've had groups of people try to start a Girls on the Run chapter in the Twin Cities for years. It's just never gotten off the ground. It sounds like you might just be the person to lead it there. Now it was my turn to laugh. I was new to the Twin Cities and a graduate student. What did I know about starting a nonprofit? Lisa and I parted ways that day, wishing each other the best of luck. Over the course of the next few weeks, I could not get the thought of starting a Girls on the Run council out of my mind. Why not me? I had nonprofit experience, albeit as a program coordinator. I had raised money before. Well, it was crowdfunding to run that half marathon. I truly believed in the mission, but who doesn't? And it would be an excellent field experience for my graduate degree. But am I the right person? While the negative self-talk was forming in my head, I remembered Coach K's words: trust yourself. I also used some of my Girls on the Run lessons around positive self-talk to outweigh the negative. I thought back to a specific Girls on the Run lesson we facilitated with my team in DC, where girls would write down negative statements that they thought about themselves or maybe heard someone say about their own self on index cards. It is definitely one of the hardest lessons to deliver because you're seeing and hearing 8, 9, 10-year-old girls writing down their internal monologue. I'm bad at math. I'm fat. I'm not good at sports. I talk too much. I'm stupid. No one likes me. My heart was breaking, not only for them, but for my own negative self-talk, my own 10-year-old self, and my own adult self. So the lesson was focused on recognizing the negative self-talk, stopping it in its tracks, and trying to turn it around into a positive statement. And as a team, we needed to come up with a word or a sound that the team can use when they engage in negative self-talk. The girls were just loving coming up with a word or a sound. We had a game show buzzer, talk to the hand. One girl wanted to do the Macarena every time negative self-talk came into her head. And we finally landed as a team on a consensus on a 90s sitcom favorite, the classic Full House, Cut It Out. So now we had our way to stop the negative self-talk. We needed to change it into a positive self-talk statement. And I'm not talking about toxic positivity here. We're not trying to teach girls to Pollyanna through everything, but we do want to consider things through a growth mindset. So as we headed into our workout, I handed out a sheet of paper to every girl that looked like a bingo card with fill in the blanks. I like myself because something I do well is my friends would tell you that I am. So I told the girls to start by filling in a few of the blanks before they set off on their run. And everyone put pen to paper except for Sienna, who was just sitting there staring at her paper. I scooted over and sat down by her. Sienna, what's up? Do you need some help? I can't do this, Coach Mary. I don't have anything to write on here, Sienna said. Her head hung low. I scooched closer. Tell me more. My head is just filled with negative thoughts. I am always messing up, Sienna said. She was starting to tear up, and so was I. Nora, who was sitting on the other side of Sienna, piped in, Sienna, you're hilarious. You're really good at science. Then Sadie across the circle looked up from her paper. Yeah, and you also have really good dance moves, and you're so good at taking care of animals. Pretty soon, the whole circle was popcorning, and Sienna was beaming. As the girls ran their laps, completing more of the positive self-talk bingo cards, Sienna had a pep in her step. And so as I was turning over Lisa's words in my head about being a great candidate to start a nonprofit, I first of all couldn't help but tell myself, cut it out. I found myself burning the midnight oil, filling out an application to start a new council late at night after my coursework was done. The day I submitted the application, Lisa sent me a list of 25 names of women in the Twin Cities who had expressed interest in starting a council. I sent an email out and I did a huge cheer when 8 women wrote back immediately that they were in. I guess I was gonna have to jump in and do something before I felt totally ready again. The early days of Girls on the Run were filled with so much excitement of building something alongside other women, and also the feeling of making things up as we went was really exhilarating. I quickly found I was good at raising money and asking for things, and I was learning how to trust myself and the skills that had led me to that point. It felt a lot like the first 5-ish miles of the Miami Half Marathon. My legs felt light. I was running on adrenaline as we ran up and over the causeway in between Miami proper and the islands that line the coast. The sunrise was framing the sailboats and the cruise ships headed out, and I breathed deeply. It was exhilarating, and I couldn't help but push my pace just a little bit, even though Coach K was always drilling into us to never go out too hot. Coach K had warned us as we studied the course map that the middle was going to be where it was murky and messy. It was hard for spectators to get there. The scenery was not as beautiful as the start or the end, and the reality was going to set in. And here's the thing. Coach Kevin is always just annoyingly right. As I hit the halfway point, my legs started to tighten. My music just wasn't pumping me up anymore. I couldn't believe I had to do that exact same distance a whole nother time. I couldn't go back to the start, and I couldn't see the finish line. It was the point of no return. I felt alone and nervous, and the most mortifying thing I wanted to avoid was being picked up by the sweeper truck for going too slow. Trust the process. Coach K's words rang in my ear. I had felt this murky middle in training before, and I knew, first of all, it was temporary, it was normal, and that I could push through it. I knew my training had prepared me for this, and my head needed to tell my legs that. There's a term for this murky middle in the startup industry, the valley of despair, sometimes called the trough of sorrow. And we started feeling this valley of despair about 6 months into starting Girls on the Run. There was fighting among new board members about how to best build the infrastructure. We were all volunteers with the huge potential for burnout. Often it felt like we were taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back. We had to beg 2 schools to let us pilot the program, and only 20 girls signed up for that first season. The beginner's high had really worn off, and we were settling into the reality of what it meant to start a nonprofit. We didn't really know what we were feeling until I confided in a mentor that things felt hard and chaotic, that I was questioning if this was worth the effort. Maybe I wasn't the right person to lead this. Oh, yay, you've made it to the valley of despair, she exclaimed with glee. This is part of the journey, and the only way out is through. Expect the struggle and just bake it into your preparation. Expect to run into obstacles along the way and prepare accordingly. You just need to trust the process. Hey, I'd heard that advice before. In society, the signals we give women and girls is that they need to be perfect, that failure is not an option. Turn back if it feels too hard because you're probably not brave enough or not well suited for it. And if you don't feel like you can check all the boxes, you should not even apply for that job. But if we are forewarned and forearmed, then preparation is half the victory. I slowed down to walk at the 7-mile aid station. I grabbed some water and I walked along the grass for a minute. This is supposed to be hard. It doesn't mean I'm doing it wrong. I repeated Coach Kevin's words in my head. Coach Kevin had, of course, prepared us for this very moment by forcing us to pick a murky middle song on our playlist that we could reach for when things sucked, and things really sucked in this moment. So I queued up Alicia Keys' Girl on Fire, and I forced my legs to speed up a little bit. Part of the murky middle process is redefining success. I started the morning with the goal to cross the finish line in under 2 hours, but my cramped legs were telling me I needed to pick a new goal. In training, we'd also practice for this. Don't let the obstacle be a dead end, just a new route. So I decided my goal was to simply cross the finish line that day and have a ton of fun doing it. And I was rewarded about 2 miles down the road by turning down the main drag of South Beach. I saw people stumbling out of the clubs in their sequins, and hearing their cheers was music to my ears. I was so glad I'd bedazzled my name on my bib so I could hear "Go Mary" running down the street. I was back in the game. I was starting to find my stride again as I spotted my mom in the crowd ringing a cowbell. The crowd will carry you home. The last third of the startup chart is called the slope of enlightenment, when things feel like they're starting to pick up steam. At Girls on the Run, there was a turning point when we stopped begging for schools to let us in, when we had more volunteers than we needed, when our name was becoming more recognizable, and this switch happened when we redefined success. We decided that our secret sauce is investing in the right coaches. And we found the right way to pass the torch to the right community leaders. We knew that our small volunteer crew could not scale this program like it needed to. So we set about creating a framework that was turnkey and easily replicable. We shared best practices, what worked well. We knew we needed to ask for help and to pass the torch to people who knew their community best. The torch has now been passed to more than 200 sites, 6,000 girls, and 1,500 coaches annually. There are more than 17,000 Girls on the Run Twin Cities alum out there. It is a true movement. For me, the best part of being in the slope of enlightenment is sharing with other nonprofits and startups what we learned in the process, to bring other women along with us. And I am so grateful to the men in positions of leadership who've not only shared their wisdom, but their power and supported us from the sidelines. Turning that last corner to see the finish line is one of the best memories ever. I spied my mom in the crowd and I took off sprinting. I crossed the finish line and promptly wanted to sign up for another race. I had been bit by the running bug. This past year at Girls on the Run has felt like we're starting at mile 6 of a half marathon all over again as a nonprofit. From COVID programming pivots, to the racial reckoning affecting our neighborhoods, to the economic downturn affecting our budget. This is brand new space that we're all entering into, and I've had to really remind myself, I've been here before. The only way out is through. In a year when it's more crucial than ever to have girls and women's voices in leadership, I am grounded in my purpose and why it's so important that I start before I feel ready. And it's my life's work to tell girls to do the same. I am the Coach Kevin to someone. So my question for you is, can you be the Coach Kevin to someone who needs help jumping in? Are there girls and women in your life you can share your power with? Can you be their cowbell ringer on the sidelines? Or do you need to take the leap? Is there somewhere you don't feel ready? Do you need to tell yourself, cut it out? I want you to remember, trust yourself, trust the process. The crowd will carry you home.
CSBSJU would like to thank the following sponsors for making this Red Talks event happen, even virtually. So we are just so thankful. And thanks so much to our sponsor, Clifton LarsonAllen.
At CLA, a bike is more than a bike. It's a symbol for moving forward, for helping you create opportunities while building relationships along the way. Whether your journey takes you around the block or around the world, we provide the kind of personalized support you need to summit new peaks, find your rhythm on the road, and cross the finish line. Like a great bike, we help make the journey smooth, the trip enjoyable, and the view at the end totally worth it. Because to us, A bike is so much more than a bike. It's a promise.
On behalf of the entire REDTalks team, we'd like to thank our next sponsor for making this event possible, the McNeely Center. The whole REDTalks team would like to give a sincere thanks to our next sponsor, who again helped make tonight possible, Bell Bank. We'd like to thank our next sponsor, Coborn's, for sponsoring this REDTalks event and for all they do for the CSB-SJU community.
Life is hectic. The morning routine turns into appointments and meetings, and before you know it, you're planning dinner. Coborn's makes your life easier with online shopping lists, digital coupons, simple recipes, meal planning ideas, videos, and more at Coborns.com. Coborn's offers the highest quality and freshest ingredients to make your meals memorable. Coborn's, bringing families together since 1921.
The whole REDTalks team would also like to thank TC Discount Granite for their sponsorship of this event. Thank you so much. Our next Red Talk presenter is a man that I was fortunate to know from my own time at St. Ben's and St. John's, and was fortunate enough to serve in student government with him. So with that, I want to say our next speaker is Muqkadeen Poole. Now, Muqka, you got to be patient with me, my friend, because you gave perhaps the longest and toughest bio, and we all know that that's not really my strength. So here goes nothing. Muqka is the class of 2019 graduate and one of the co-creators and co-founders of The Move. The Move uses a full range of diversity, equity, and inclusion-related services to help the companies, organizations, groups, and educational institutions recruit and retain a diverse and productive workforce while also aspiring to create a sense of community. The Move focuses on strategic, intentional planning and actively assists clients in the execution and implementation of their equity and inclusion plans to best serve all of their customers, employees, and students. And as I mentioned, Muqka is the co-founder. He's the creative lead, and Muqka has been involved in leadership and development and diversity, equity, and inclusion training for over 6 years, specializing primarily in assisting educational entities and companies with DEI-based community building and organizing. Originally from Newark, New Jersey, Muqka grew up witnessing and experiencing the effects of systems of oppression in his neighborhood and in his schools. This motivated him to become a student and researcher of community building. In college at St. John's, Muqka focused his research on urban community building and college campus activism throughout the United States. He delved into learning more about social equity within the education system and developing possible alternatives to mass incarceration. Muqkadeen's work, however, was not limited to his own scholarly and personal interests. He believed his findings must be shared in constructive and positive ways to help organizations, schools, and companies across the country in their pursuit of a more inclusive, diverse, and equitable communities. This led him to co-founding The Move as a way to share his research, experience, knowledge, story, and personality to both inspire others and assist clients in creating a DEI-centered sense of community. In just a few short years, Muqka has led trainings and worked with clients in many spaces, including the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity, the White Privilege Conference, at Dr. Martin Luther King High School in Detroit, at De La Salle High School in Minneapolis, at various George Floyd rallies, at the Minnesota State House, Capella University staff and administration, and roughly a dozen additional community organizing efforts and initiatives throughout the country. Muqkadeen's dedication to learning and experiencing the world through the lens of different cultures has led him to explore these DEI issues globally, from studying educational frameworks in France, China, and Vietnam to volunteering in the Flint, Michigan water crisis, and standing with Standing Rock in the Dakotas. During both high school and college, Muqkadeen played important leadership roles, serving in elected and appointed positions at both schools and earning the highest awards offered at each: the St. Benedict's Prep Presidential Award and the St. John's University Man of Extraordinary Service Award. While in college, Muqka became known for his role in advocating for necessary administrative and cultural changes to support multicultural community. On the St. John's Senate, he created spaces for traditionally oppressed groups to voice their concerns on campus. He also founded the school's first multi-religious group, focusing on an additional aspect of diversity and inclusion often overlooked: religion. He graduated in 2019 with a degree in Peace and Conflict Studies with a social justice concentration and minors in history and entrepreneurship. After a short stint volunteering in the Manila, Philippines, Muqka currently works as an academic advisor at Capella University, where administrators quickly tapped him to lead these DEI trainings, workshops, and initiatives company-wide. Muqkadeen has always centered his work on the historical and contemporary forces folks from traditionally marginalized identities face, with an ultimate goal of providing a holistic view of liberation for all. So excited to hear Muqka speak. Sorry if I butchered any of that, my friend. We are so excited to hear you talk, and thanks for sharing your time with us today.
Did I hurt your feelings, baby? My grandmother said as tears rolled down my 8-year-old self's face, and I felt confused, but also cared for. You see, earlier that day, I had yelled at my neighbors and said some bad words. I called them dumb and stupid because I thought that they had stolen my Spider-Man toy, which was actually under my couch in the living room. I didn't look good enough. And my grandmother heard me. So she sternly said to me, "Don't say things you don't mean, because that can hurt someone." And me hearing the sternness in her voice, started to cry. And her, seeing me cry, said, "Did I hurt your feelings, baby?" I mean, this woman had just scolded me, and now she was caring for me. We're gonna talk more about that. But first, my name is Muqkadeen Poole. I'm a graduate of St. John's University class of 2019, and I'm here to talk about community accountability and community responsibility. So, what do those things mean? Community responsibility and community accountability speak to our specific obligation and duties in a given space. Our personal obligations and duties in a given space that are connected to the progression of that community. So, given a scenario which I started with, where was the community accountability and community responsibility? It was all over that space right there. It was all over the space. You see, my grandmother knew that I was perpetuating violence by calling my neighbors names. And she knew that I wasn't holding up to my own community responsibility and community accountability by calling someone else's names, and not actually doing prior work of looking for that toy that was under the couch. And she knew that she hurt my feelings, or she had caused me to have an emotional reaction. And she asked, "Did I hurt your feelings, baby?" So in my 8-year-old state, my grandmother was practicing restorative justice practices. My grandmother was holding up values of community responsibility and community accountability. Meaning she was calling me in, but also calling me out, and then holding my feelings in the space. A master facilitator. Bless her soul. So When we're talking about community responsibility and we're talking about community accountability, that's exactly what it means. We're willing to call people in order to progress the community, in order to have the community hold up its values and its duties and its obligations and its willingness to be better. I'm gonna give you another example. So when I was in middle school, I wanted to be a fly guy. And part of my fly guy mantra was I couldn't wear big winter coats. And it gets cold, so you have to wear a big winter coat. So one day I decided not to wear my big winter coat, and I was walking to school in my uniform, crisp, clean, and fly, I thought. As I'm walking, I hear someone calling to me, "Hey you, hey you, hey you, I know you hear me talking to you." I stopped and turned around, a little scared, and it was Miss Anya on her porch, 7 o'clock in the morning, watching the kids go to school. And she asked me, "Where is your winter coat?" And a little nervous, I didn't respond. And then she asked again, "Where is your winter coat?" And 5 minutes after, I was back in my house, getting my winter coat, putting it on, and going to school. I can be a fly guy with a winter coat on. Later that night, my mother asked me, "Why did Miss Anya tell me you didn't have a winter coat on?" So in this example, you can see how pervasive community responsibility and community accountability can be. In this community, Miss Anya was this activist, this social grandmother, this social mom, this social person who actually accounted for the people in the community, the kids in the community. She cared for the kids. So if you didn't have a coat on, if your shoes were too beat up, if you looked like you didn't have a meal in the last few hours, if you looked like you needed a slice of apple pie or cheesecake, or if you looked like you needed a hug, Miss Anya was there, willing to call people in for the betterment of themselves and the betterment of the community. A change agent, really. A change agent. Some would even say a revolutionary. So, when we're talking about community responsibility, when we're talking about community accountability, let's bring it to each and every space that we occupy. Because in each and every space, violence is also pervasive. There's a perpetuator of violence. There are usually witnesses of violence, sometimes. And there usually are receivers of violence. And so whether you are any of these three folks, you are being affected by that violence. So if you're that witness, I'm asking you to have that community, that social responsibility and accountability to call those folks out when things happen. Call those folks in when things happen. And if they're your loved ones, if they're folks that you hold with light and love, ask them after calling them out, calling them in, "Did I hurt your feelings, baby?" Explore that emotional response. Explore that uncomfortability, because in that uncomfortability, y'all, is learning. It's an education moment. Why did I feel uncomfortable when my grandmother spoke sternly to me? Was it because I'm used to my grandmother speaking lovingly? Was it because I didn't want to embarrass her? Was it because I didn't want her to think that I was a bad person? See, these questions that I'm asking myself can be and should be answered. So in a given space when violence is perpetuated and someone calls somebody in and then you ask, "Did I hurt your feelings, baby?" Or you ask, "What did you mean by that?" Or "What do you mean by that?" Or you ask questions that gets the folks to actually reflect on their actions, learning takes place. And I'm not asking for folks of marginalized identities, traditional oppressed identities, to go around and be holding folks' emotions for them. I'm not asking for that. What I'm asking for, or challenging, is the status quo. Usually, we just let things happen. If we keep it in a buck, if we keep it at 100%, we let things happen. I'm a graduate of St. John's University. I've been in the spaces where things happen and nobody says anything about it. But we think it. We think it. There's so many intelligent people on those campuses that I know we think it. But we don't say anything about it. And it's part of the Minnesota culture, the Minnesota niceness culture, to not challenge the status quo. But more than ever, in 2021, we need to be challenging the status quo, challenging each other, and challenging ourselves. Challenging ourselves for the betterment of each other and the betterment of the community. My dream is for everyone in the community to wake up every day and feel like they belong and feel like they are valued. And something like community responsibility and community accountability can make sure that happens. Can make sure that happens. And y'all, I kind of simplified it with those two examples, but it can get ugly. It can get ugly. It can be uncomfortable. It can be a conversation that you don't want to have with your aunt at Thanksgiving. It can be a conversation that you don't want to have with your dad every time you return from college. It can be a conversation that you don't want to have with your coworkers in a given space that you feel uncomfortable with. It can be that. But you do have resources. You do have resources, and you can be a change agent. You can be. So I really wanted to speak to that today. Again, my name is Muqkadeen Poole. I'm a graduate of St. John's University, class of 2019. Whoop, whoop. And I want to say, be that change agent. Not only for someone else, but for yourself. For the betterment of your community. And to progress those spaces to a place where everyone feels like they belong and everyone feels like they are valued. Even folks who are perpetuating violence. Because I tell you, once they get over that, did I hurt your feelings, baby? That reflection question, they may get to a space where they realize they were actually wrong. Because I sure was wrong. Because that Spider-Man toy was under the couch. I sure was wrong because I should have had a winter coat on. Or to give you an even stronger example, I remember my first meeting about feminism. I usually give talks and presentations on diversity, equity, inclusion, community work, liberation work, political education. I remember my first meeting on feminism. I'm a sophomore in high school, and we're talking about misogyny and the history of the patriarchy. And I'm in a room full of women. And we're talking about this, and I feel myself become uncomfortable. I can feel myself sweating. And so in this sweating, anxious state, I literally stood up out my seat and said, I can protect you all. And there was an awkward silence. I tell you, it was about 10 seconds of awkward silence. People just staring at me. And I sat down, and the conversation continued. And later after that, I took it upon myself to go up to one of my friends and ask, what did I do wrong in that space? Did I offend anybody? Did I do something wrong? And my friend, being gracious as she was, she said, Muqka, part of feminism means that we don't need your protection. We shouldn't need your protection. She took the time to actually explain this to me. And in that scenario, in that space, I was the one who actually ended up calling myself out. Because sometimes as the perpetrator, we can feel that uncomfortableness. So to folks of those privileged identities, to folks who have privileged identities, you remember, privilege is not always something that we seek or something that we are or we knowingly have. I mean, Peggy McIntosh calls it our invisible backpack. There's things that we have in that invisible backpack that we aren't too knowledgeable of, but have given us some privileges that we're able to use maneuvering in society. So, when violence happens, when violence is perpetuated, let's take that responsibility and accountability for that violence. Let's use it as an education tool for ourselves, for others, in the betterment of community. For the betterment of community. I didn't mention that my grandmother popped my hand, or she said, you can't have dinner tonight. She wasn't punitive in that sense. Remember, I said she kind of used a restorative justice practice there. And that's what community accountability and community responsibility are really getting at. Restoring the space. Transforming the space. I would even say she used a transformative justice practice. Transforming the space. Making it better. Making it actually align with its rules, its obligations, its duties. Making it align with its contracts, its social order. Instead of having this space that is hypocritical. Instead of having this space with individuals who know that this is not allowed, who know that this is violent, and still allow it. All in all, y'all, all in all, I'm asking folks, I'm challenging folks, even in these virtual spaces these days, to call each other in, call each other out. Hold your siblings to a higher standard. By your siblings, I mean folks who are also not your blood. To a higher standard in order for us to be able to build a better community. Again, my name is Muqkadeen Poole. I'm a graduate of St. John's University, class of 2019. And did I hurt your feelings, baby?
Thanks so much, Muka, for that awesome speech and conversation. You're a good man. I can't wait to see you in person, and probably apologize for butchering the intro. But our next Red Talk presenter is Jackie Hayden, and the title of her speech is What Happens When We Don't Have the ACT? Jackie is a St. Ben's grad, class of 2012, and Jackie's passion for youth empowerment and advocacy flourished while she was a student at St. Ben's. When she wasn't in class as a peace studies major, she was working with youth in the community through a variety of organizations. Her passions led her to being recognized as a Minnesota Campus Compact Student Leader, Bonner Leader, Phillips Scholar, and most recently, as an outstanding alum at the Bonner Program 25th anniversary for her exemplary service to youth in marginalized communities. For the past 8 years, she's been working with low-income youth through multiple organizations throughout the country, most recently through the Minnesota Office of Higher Education. All of this has led to her current position as the College and Career Coordinator at Brooklyn Center High School, which is located in the most diverse city in the state. When she is not working, you can find her at home in Northeast Minneapolis with her husband, John, and her lovely children, Teddy and Leona. Thanks, Jackie.
Do you remember taking the ACT for the first time? The bright fluorescent lights of the room, your sharpened number 2 pencils, and your T9 calculator with the extra batteries? Or if you were like me, you brought along 5 extra pencils just in case you dropped them and you didn't want the proctor to think you were cheating, so you couldn't pick them up. The nerves deep in your gut as you think about this test that will likely determine your college acceptances, scholarship money, and your future. Then the proctor comes into the room, passes out the booklet, and go. Questions flash in front of you. Questions like this. For many people, the ACT or the SAT feels like a rite of passage, this horrible 4-hour test that everyone must simply take. I know some people now who make the loser of their fantasy football team take it as a form of punishment. It's a test that we all collectively hated taking, unless you were one of the students who scored high. But for the majority of us, you likely accepted that this is just the way things are. This is a hurdle that we need to take to get into college. Don't really think about it, just do it. But upon closer examination of the test, we discover its ugly roots. According to the article, The SAT and Systematic Racism by Bruce G. Hammond, in 1923, Carl Brigham of Princeton University published a study of American intelligence, in which he wrote that testing showed the superiority of the Nordic race group and warned of the promiscuous interminglings of these new immigrants in the American gene pool. Shortly after the book's publication, the College Board commissioned him to lead development of the SAT, which debuted in 1926. Now, let me reiterate this. Carl Brigham was a eugenicist who thought that his Nordic race was superior to everyone else's. He published a study on this and said he could prove it with testing. And 3 years later, the College Board thought he would be the perfect candidate to commission the SAT. About 20 years later than that, the ACT was created, modeled very similar to the SAT. And now, 70 years later, the SAT and ACT haven't changed that much. Yet despite its blatant racist history, not even to mention its inability to accurately measure or capture a student's intelligence, many colleges still use it as a way to systemically determine who attends and who is rejected from their institutions. They use it as a way to allocate dollars and to open or close doors for students. New research has found that over the last decade, race has become a higher predictor of SAT and ACT test scores than parents' education or family income. I am the college and career coordinator of Brooklyn Center High School. Brooklyn Center High School is a school with 89% students of color and 88.5% of our students on free and reduced lunch. This year has been especially challenging for our community. The COVID-19 pandemic has hit communities of color disproportionately, affecting employment, physical health, and mental health. On top of the global health pandemic, the pandemic of racial injustice and white supremacy has exposed itself in painful and traumatic instances. Every time an unarmed Black person is shot or suffocated, my students are shot and suffocated too. The toll of having to justify their humanity in a world that has made it clear that it was not made for them is so deeply painful and emotionally taxing. In this hardship, though, I have seen God's love through the resilience, determination, and joy of my students. I'm recording this video from my office. Last week, as I worked, my students interviewed for a full ride leadership scholarship to college in the rooms next to me. 11 of my senior students shared their own unique stories and competed in this final phase of the leadership scholarship, making this group of finalists the largest in our school's history. Out of the 11 students, 7 students received the scholarship, making Brooklyn Center the school with the largest amount of scholars earning this prestigious scholarship than any other school in the Twin Cities Metro. What's important to add is that Brooklyn Center only has 120 seniors. In their interviews for this scholarship, students explained how their autism does not define them, and they desire to use their college education to advocate for people with disabilities. I had a few students share that as Hmong children of refugees, that they are indeed the living embodiment of their parents' dreams, and their parents and grandparents crossed the dangerous Mekong River so that they would have the opportunity to cross that graduation stage and to go to college. I had a student share that as a Black man in Minneapolis, there are people who see him and their first thoughts are wondering if he'll take their purse or what gang he's in. They think he lives a life of violence, but that's far from the truth. He's a man who loves math and video games. He has a 4.0 GPA. He's a 2 on the Enneagram, and he's taken college classes for the past 2 years. He loves to play basketball and talk about things beyond his imagination, but they'll see him as a criminal because they refuse to see him as anything else. For the first time, my students did not have to submit their ACT scores to college. Due to the pandemic, most schools in Minnesota allowed students to choose whether or not they wanted to submit their scores. And for my students who never believed or felt that the ACT was a reflection of their potential or their ability, they didn't submit it. And because of that, we have more students selected to more colleges, more scholarship dollars allocated to our students, and an overall higher school morale. Younger students are looking at the senior class thinking, I can do that too. What students put more emphasis on instead is sharing their stories of resilience and strength. And in their applications, they wrote essays, they interviewed, and they shed some tears. They talked about how, despite all the challenges that they face, they still show up with joy. They radiate kindness. They volunteer and mentor younger students. They point out racist curriculum to their teachers. And they challenge the status quo and break down barriers. They proudly compete for full ride scholarships to college, and they show up every day with the courage to dismantle oppressive systems. This year of chaos has allowed my students to show themselves authentically and beautifully, has made me realize that we've been asking the wrong questions all along. Instead of colleges asking, how much do you know? They should be asking, how much do you desire to know? How have you shown up for your community? What are your greatest hopes and dreams? And what do you want your legacy to be? But to shift the entrance into higher education into one of a passion for education, then we must also do the work of unlearning. We need to reimagine what could be instead of taking the comfortable path of what has always been. For me, as a daughter of an Asian immigrant, my mom reinforced that access to education was my pathway to success. If I could perform and follow the steps that were expected of me, then I could get a good job and have a happy, stable life. And so I did the work that had to be done. And I know that I'm sitting here talking to you today because I am an alumni of the College of St. Benedict. But in all reality, the more that I work, the more I realize I don't know. And as I continue this journey in my professional career and I listen to my students and their powerful testimonies of brilliance and bravery, and I realize that true success is not simply following unjust policies, entrance exams, and standards. It is to actively fight against these things that hold humanity down. It is to reject them. It is to choose the unpopular path that maybe many of our colleagues don't agree with. It is to instead showcase students in the best light possible, to believe in them and their stories and show them that their grit outside of the classroom is worth more than a correct answer on an exam. It is to inspire a deep learning that's not performative, but genuine curiosity fully lived out. But yet I fear that when the COVID-19 vaccine is fully administered and when life returns to normal, the colleges will shift back to their normal too. They will go back to business as usual and will continue to use the GPA and the ACT as a grid to determine scholarships, entrance, and subconsciously self-worth. That news stations and publication will point to schools like mine and show disparities and call out phrases like achievement gap or opportunity gap or deficit, instead of focusing on the ways that my students show up and break their back and prove themselves and fight fully and vibrantly so that they too can have a seat at the table. Why are we not listening to the children?
Thank you so much, Jackie, for your talk. And Jackie's work never stops. When we were putting Red Talks together, trying to do everything remotely, I overheard her talking with one of our Red Talks team about hopping off after the Zoom and working with a student that was interested in looking at St. Ben's and St. John's. So all that Jackie does, her work never stops, and we're so thankful for it and for representing our community so well. Our last Red Talk speaker of the night is another speaker that I have a privilege of calling my friend. Mike Reilly will be our last presenter and on his Red Talk speech of listening. Mike is a SJU class of 2019. Mike's originally from La Cañada, California. Mike studied English and exercise science during his time at St. John's. He was an active member of the community. He was a baseball player for 4 years where I got to know him, and as a resident assistant for 3. And just back to the baseball, Mike was a tremendous catcher, just a bulldog behind the plate. And I can say this because I had a great view of him from the bench. my entire time at St. John's. I was making sure he was thoroughly hydrated when he came back in from the dugout, though, I can tell you that. No, tremendous baseball player, tremendous guy. After graduation, Mike joined the Benedictine Volunteer Corps, and was assigned to live, work, and pray at Christ the King Priory in Toro, Uganda. There, he taught and learned with the monks of Christ the King. In March, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, he returned to St. John's, and along with his volunteer partner, John Miles, finished his year of service. Towards the end of the summer, Mike accepted a position as a faculty resident in the Residential Life program at St. John's and was offered the assistant director position for the Benedictine Volunteer Corps. So Mike brings his wealth of experience that way to the topic of listening.
So fun fact about me is that I'm a triplet, and one of the first or the earliest stories that I remember my parents telling me is when me, Jack, and Joe were, around 2 or 3 years old. Jack and Joe were the ones who were the fighters, right? So they'd always get in fights, and I would be the one who would sit in the middle of them and put my hands up like this and say, non-verbally, don't fight, don't fight, don't fight. So that's the first experience I had of listening, maybe not verbally, but at least to my environment. So this talk today is going to be a little bit about listening and, some of my experiences in the past year and a half, 2 years that have kind of led me to these conclusions. Okay. So when I graduated in 2019, I was selected into the Benedictine Volunteer Corps, which is a year-long service opportunity through St. John's Abbey for graduates of St. John's, where you live, work, and pray in a monastery for the period of 1 year. And I was fortunate enough to be selected to go to Tororo, Uganda for 1 year, and ended up coming back a little bit early because of COVID, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So one of my first experiences in Uganda when John Miles and John is my volunteer partner. So when we got to Uganda, there was a little mix-up in work. And so we ended up just sitting in our rooms for 2 or 3 weeks doing absolutely nothing, right? I read Harry Potter for the fifth or sixth time. John was reading some Russian author, right? And it was a good experience of, we were facing culture shock and all these other things, but the experiences was we were not necessarily listening to our environment because we were so focused on ourselves and, oh my gosh, what's happening, right? So it kind of forced us to go to our site director, Father Joseph, who was a monk of Tororo. And we said, hey, Father Joseph, we've got no work. What are we doing? And he looked at us like we were kind of out of our minds for a little bit. And he's like, what do you mean? You don't have any work? He expected us to be working at the hospital at this point, which is owned and run by the monastery. So anyways, so we come to him, he says that, and he drives up to the hospital right after that conversation, and the next day we start working there. And so this kind of leads into my full experience of listening and being able to understand the community and the needs that they had. So we start working in the hospital, and we initially start scanning HR documents and employee files for employees to upload them to the Ministry of Health database for the government's database, right? And it's not glorious work, and it's it was pretty tedious. And if I told you, hey, I went to Uganda and lived in a monastery for a year, and all I did was upload files, you would say, really, like that's it? But it was work that needed to be done. And while we were at the hospital, we were able to interact with the employees, and a constant thing that we kept getting from the employees was, do you know computers? Are you well versed in computers? Could you teach computers? Right? And being able to interact with the employees and listen to them, John and I ended up coming up with a plan to create this computer class because so many people kept asking us, hey, can you teach us computers? Shortly after that, I think in January, John and I had just gotten back from Nairobi and visiting the rest of the volunteers who were serving in East Africa. And we came to our work supervisor and said, here's our plan for the class. And he said, okay, so the next week we started, right? And the first day of class, I think, was the most terrified I had been in a while. One, because I hate public speaking. And two, because I didn't really know what I was doing, right? I don't have a huge breadth or depth of knowledge in computer skills. But I'm standing in front of this 30, 40 person class, all who are Ugandan adults, all with kids. And I'm this 22-year-old white guy who's saying, hey, I can teach you computers, which I did and I ended up doing, right? But, I was nervous, I was frightened, I was scared. So even though there was a need, I was still, hesitant to act upon it, even though we did eventually, right? And I think one point where it really showed me that it was rewarding was there was this nurse in the ward. Her name was Robin. And she had a 3-year-old son. And I noticed that when she worked the night shift, started at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m., she would come to the computer lab around 3 p.m. So 2-3 hours early, she would leave her kid and she would come to this computer class and start working on the internet searches we had predetermined, or how to put your fingers when you type, right? And to me, that moment was so rewarding because, oh my goodness, this grown woman is taking time away from her family, coming to work early and trying to better herself because of, our class. So I was really touched by that. And I was, it kind of showed that we had purposeful work and what we were doing mattered, right? So then the third story here I have about listening is coming back from Uganda because of COVID to St. John's. I didn't really have a plan for what I was doing personally. I think in my head, I was going to go to DC. My brother lives out there, so I was going to go live and work with him. And in talking to some folks on campus, I found that there was maybe a need on campus for work. So, there was a position open in residential life with faculty residents. And then there was a position open in the Benedictine Volunteer Corps office. So, coming in without a plan and then coming back to St. John's and being able to listen to my surroundings and saying, where is their need on campus? I listened and kind of discerned, and I figured out, hey, there is need in Res Life and the BVC, right? And that's kind of where I'd landed now. So I think an important piece about listening, right, in all these scenarios is, one, you have to be present. You have to be present in your environment to listen, okay? And in doing that, you can hear the people around you and listen to their needs or the needs of your community. So, and why is this important, right? Because in listening empathetically, you're able to listen to the needs around you, right? And in doing that, you can do purposeful work for the community that you live in or that you work in. A good takeaway or a good quote from the Rule of Benedict is the first line of the prologue, right? Where it says, listen to the master's instruction and attend to them with the ear of your heart. So I guess, if there's one takeaway from this talk, and it, to you as young alums, or even to myself, right? It's how can we listen empathetically so that we can do good and purposeful work in the communities that we live and that we serve in.
Well, I think that's going to do it from here. We want to thank all of our amazing speakers who had unique circumstances this year and had to film their talks remotely. We want to thank the entire REDTalks team, especially Catherine and Kathy. Thank you for all your help and for putting up with me. I'd like to thank my girlfriend who's in the other room who let me banish her while I filmed this, and for not laughing too hard every time I screwed up, because trust me, there were a quality and quite a few for the blooper reel. And thanks to everybody for watching. Fingers crossed this is our last year doing this show virtually. But hang in there, we'll get through it together. Wear your mask, get vaccinated when it's your turn, and hopefully we'll see you all next year for REDTalks back in person. Good night, everybody. Good night, Mom. Good night, Dad.